Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
My name is Ray Boessel Jr. and I'm from Bigfork, Minnesota. And I built the Birchbark canoes, which I was taught by my wife Christy, and I then worked 3 years for her grandfather who started a business back in the 1920s. The canoe business has been here a long time, the canoes have been here even longer. Well, originally it wasn't really a business. Her grandfather built canoes. He made some money at it, but back in the 1920s and 30s, they were only getting like $1 a day working in the gravel pits. And so he needed some extra money when he quit the gravel pits, so he was building a canoe and a guy bought it, so he kept building them. Bill Hafeman was my wife's grandfather, and he was famous for building canoes for many years. He made them for the state of Minnesota, for museums and stuff. And through all this time, there's been different people came through and they would write up articles about him. Well, eventually a guy named Charles Kuralt, which most people know from CBS, he heard about Bill and building the canoes. And he looked all over, and so he finally found Bill, he found out where he was at, and he came, I think it was 1981 or 82. But they were here for a week, and they filmed Bill, and they did all the camera stuff with that. And then Charles Kuralt came on Friday. He came in, and I thought he was a game warden. He came in wearing just all khaki clothes. I thought we were in trouble with the game warden or something, you know. He comes in, and he introduces himself to Bill and everything. And he sat down, and he sat by the riverbank with Bill, and they talked about stuff. And Bill told him how it was back here in the old days. But they sat and talked. He came in the house, and he had dinner with Bill and Violet, and I got to eat with him too, and the camera crew and stuff. But he was just a real friend of the guys. He was just like a neighbor down the street, just walked in and said hi, you know, started talking. It wasn't like he was a famous person or anything. I mean, he was real common about everything. So it was kind of nice meeting him. Well, this here is my building table. This is where I build the canoes. And this is my wife's grandfather's. It was Bill Hafeman's before I ever used it. He had this table before I was here, and it might be as old as I am. So it's a lot of the tools I use, the jigs here, and a lot of clamps and the tools that I use are all tools that were my wife's grandfather's. The canoe I lay out on this table here, and you see there's cracks in the boards here, and that lines up with a sew seam that's on the side of the canoe. It's all sewed with roots from a black spruce tree. There's no nails or glue in the whole canoe. So I lay the bark out flat. I sew what we call a blanket first, which is 15 pieces sewn together. There's 3 bottom pieces, and there are 6 side pieces on each side. They get sewed together in the blanket. Then I make the ends by sewing 2 pieces together flat on these small platforms I have down here by the wall. And they have a crack between the boards, same as this, so I can sew them 2 pieces together. I fold those pieces in half. I bend bow stems on these jigs here. This here would be for a Chippewa or a Ojibwe longnose. This one down here is for a Taste of Bulls or Melisite tribe style. Either one I can make with this shape of bow stem. And this one down here is the Algonquin old style. And so I make different tribal styles of canoes by depending on what shape I bend the bow stem. But then that bow stem just gets sewed inside the canoe, inside the end, and shapes the end. After the ends are made and the blanket is sewn, I have this frame you can see here that's shaped like the bottom of a canoe. So that just shapes the bottom. The form in there, I brace it so it stays centered on the canoe so it doesn't move around. I keep that braced down. I fold the sides up using these jigs here on the side. And there's 7 of these jigs on each side of the canoe. There's here, here, and all the way down on both sides. And those give me the depth of my canoe. And I also place them so I get the width of the canoe. So they're 36 inches wide basically in the center, and they taper down to the ends. After that, I clamp the gunwales on the top. And that's a long wooden rail on the top of the canoe. In the old days, I used to mount guns on the top of the boats, like the ships, sailing ships, and also on the big canoes, the North Canoe and the Montreal Canoe. And so top wall of a boat or ship, we just called the gun wall, which got slid around the gunwale or gunnel. And that's what these are, is the top wall of the ship then, or the top wall of the canoe. After the gunwales are clamped on, I do the root bindings here. And these root bindings, there's about 70 of those, and they hold the gunwales tight together so that the ribs don't pop through. Okay, well, this here is a spruce root, and this is what holds the whole canoe together. They're sewn together with these roots. It takes about 500 feet of root to do a canoe this size here. What I do, I've got 3 holes here underneath the gunwale. So I just start in the first hole, I pull the root through, and I take the wide end, I stick that in between the gunwales. I push that down in there. I go through each hole about 3 or 4 times, try and make the bindings about the same width of binding. You think about it, the natives never had all these tools. when they made the canoes, even like on all like this, all they had would be like a deer antler, which they would grind on a stone to make corners if they wanted to use it for drilling, or they would leave it round if they wanted to use it just for enlarging the hole like this here, which I'm doing right there. You just go through each one of these holes until you get the width of the binding that you need it to be. The roots aren't always straight. Up and down here it's got kinks, but you just sew them in there and you work with it. You get the bindings as tight as you can get them. Then when the ribs go in, there's a groove on the inside gunwale that I make when I make the gunwales. And the ribs are just hammered in. When the ribs get hammered in between the gunwales, that tightens the roots up a little bit more even. Now I'm on the last hole, and that's why I'm going to make that binding. So I do now, I come back to the middle hole. I go back to the first hole to the inside. And just cut it off. So it just makes a little S-lock underneath the gunwales, and the root dries in place and it holds. There's no fancy knots or anything to it. Every other binding, I think there's one here is a peg. We peg every other one. And the natives used to use like thorns from a thorn apple tree. And that would hold it so the inside gunwale doesn't push up when you put the ribs in. But after the bindings are all done, they'll knock all this woodwork that's framing it, that'll all come out. Now line it lengthways with cedar lining, which I have some over here. This goes lengthways inside of the canoe. You see from the cedar log here, the outside layers are lighter. That's the sapwood. That's what I make into the lining. The heartwood is darker, which is drier and stiffer, and I make that into the ribs for the canoe. So I get the ribs from the inside of the tree and the lining from the outside of the tree. I get both out of one piece of wood then. These are the tools I use here. This here is a froe, like to use for making shingles. And I just beat that in with my maul. So that's what I use for starting the split. When it's heavier like this, I need something with a handle, which gives me leverage for breaking it apart. But then after it gets down, then I just use a butcher knife like this here, and you start the split and you crack it apart. First, I'm going to be taking the bark off. And this is fresh, and it works better when it's fresh. And that's just a wooden wedge that I use here. You see that's all wet inside, that's the sap on it yet. But first I got to get the width of the ribs. I'll take the hammer and a wooden wedge. I have different kinds of wedges. Some are oak. I have some Osage orange a fellow from Indiana gave me. I tried those. But I just need a wedge that's harder than what the cedar is. Now I mark from the outside of the tree, from the sapwood. I'll split the heart out of it. When you split the cedar, after the heart is out, you always keep your split in the center, and you can control the split as it goes down. It splits this way easier in the grain than it did the other way when I was using the wedge. Now I just stay in the center all the time. I don't run this froe all the way down because you can see where it makes these marks in the wood here. If you did that all the way down, then it would fracture when you try bending the rib. So you start to split with your blade. And after you've started to split, then you pull it apart by hand. Now it's thinner, I can just use a butcher knife like this. I don't need the leverage of the froe. You just twist the knife in it. You see I keep my feet against it so the end doesn't flop around. Use your knees, sometimes use your whole body. Use everything to split the cedar. The reason we use a heartwood for the ribs is because it's drier and stiffer, and it holds the shape of the canoe better, whereas a sapwood is more flexible, it won't hold the shape as well. When you're splitting like this, at times it feels like you're just splitting, you're just pushing the split through when you start at the top here. It's like you're pushing the split right through it. This here would be the thickness of a rib then. I have a shave horse here. And Christy's grandfather used to say that everybody had one of these shave horses. They made handles for their tools and stuff with these. They're just something everybody had when they first homesteaded up here. But it's just a clamp where you step down on the clamp, and then this dumb head comes down against your work, and it holds it so you have both hands free for using your draw knife. We leave the rib wider in the center so it has more strength for holding the shape of the canoe. But we taper on the ends so that we'll go between the bindings. And there's a rib. Wider in the center, so it has a strength, and a narrow on the end, so it will go between the bindings. Now I'm down to the sapwood here, so this here will all be made into the lining. You have to keep this end from flipping around, otherwise you lose it. You control a split as you go down by how you bend the wood. See the one on my left here, it's this side here, I'm bending harder because it's a little stronger. So you bend the heavy side and it keeps the split going down straight. The reason this lining is in the canoe is because without the lining in the canoe, the bark will shrink between the ribs, and then the canoe looks like a starved horse on the water with all the ribs on the outside, which would be drag and slow the canoe down. So you put this lining in before you put the ribs in. It makes the outside shell stay smoother and makes the canoe faster on the water. The reason we make it as thin as we do is because when we put it in the canoe, it gets lapped over each other like this. And if you had a thicker piece, then the bark going over that, there'd be a hollow underneath between the bark and the lining where that would be too thick. So we split it thinner, that way it keeps it so it's tighter against the bark. It makes a stronger shell on the canoe then. It takes me about 3 hours to get enough cedar split out for the canoe, for the ribs and lining both.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.